Who has inspired you most in your life? Most would say a parent or maybe a relative. As a student, I get the experience of knowing many teachers, but one has inspired me immensely. Many people have had a special kind of a teacher who they admired greatly. I would like to acknowledge my math teacher, Mrs. Cronin, who inspired me and guided me through my middle school experience. Mrs. Cronin is a very motivating, caring, and energetic teacher, which is clearly proved every day. Mrs. Cronin's will to motivate makes her a very special teacher. In 6th and 7th grade, I had some trouble with math. I voiced this concern with Mrs. Cronin, and she stayed after school with me on several occasions. This meant a lot to me because if it wasn't for her helping me, I wouldn't have understood the math. Mrs. Cronin helped motivate a lot of the quiet students in math in the 7th grade. She noticed that there were some students that were answering all of the questions and came up with a clever idea of pulling people's names out of a hat to decide who would answer questions. After using this method, the quiet kids in my class were more motivated to participate in class. Every day, everyone in her class is motivated for the class simply because of the attitude she brings to class. In my first 2 years of middle school, I can remember how Mrs. Cronin's attitude in class would motivate everyone to enjoy and look forward to math. Along with her will to motivate, Mrs. Cronin was a great teacher because of the care she had for her students. Mrs. Cronin inspired her students with her constant display of care towards her students. When I was in 6th grade, I went to the Alden Jones camp. I had some trouble with being homesick, but the whole time, Mrs. Cronin was comforting to me. This is something I'll never forget and inspired me greatly. Also, when I was in 7th grade, she got married. Many students, including me, wanted to see wedding pictures. She took the time during lunch to show me all the pictures. Throughout middle school, I've gone to almost every ski trip. Mrs. Cronin took the time out of her weekend many times to chaperone, even if it meant sitting in the lodge most of the time, for a very long time. 7th grade was the last year I had her as a teacher, and on the last day of school, I had to say goodbye. Before I left, I gave her a hug, and I remember being very sad to realize that was the last day I would be a student in Mrs. Cronin's math class. Mrs. Cronin's level of energy and excitement brought light to everyone's day. Every time I walk into Mrs. Cronin's classroom with a glum look on my face, she was able to make me smile or make me laugh. Almost every day that I was in Mrs. Cronin's math class, she would tell us we were the noisiest class she had. What she didn't realize was it was because of the energy she displayed that made us excited and energetic in math class. I have never seen Mrs. Cronin walk into JMS without a smile on her face. She puts everyone around her in a bright mood with her constant display of joy and energy. I hope everyone understands how truly unique Mrs. Cronin is as a teacher. I believe everyone has a person in their life that inspires them greatly. I hope you now see how Mrs. Cronin's motivation, care, and energy makes her that person for me. The impact Mrs. Cronin continues to have on students today is clearly seen by everyone at JMS. I know that when I move on to high school and I think about all the joyous times and hardships I had to overcome, I will think of Mrs. Cronin and the joy she brought to my middle school experience.